There's far more going right in any of us, in all of us, than there is going wrong if we're here, right? And if we're listening to educational material, we want to better ourselves. There's so much more that's going right in us. And it's a good place for us to start because it helps us to be able to look at what's not going the way we want it to be, where we want to bring change in our lives. But we should start from a position of strength.
Welcome to the Huberman Lab podcast, where we discuss science and science-based tools for everyday life. I'm Andrew Huberman, and I'm a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford School of Medicine. My guest today is Dr. Paul Conti. Dr. Paul Conti is a medical doctor and psychiatrist and an expert in recovery from trauma. He is also one of the foremost public educators on how anyone can build a greater sense of agency, confidence, and well-being in their life. Today, we discuss the practical aspects of building and maintaining mental health. In particular, how to identify your natural strengths and the often unseen opportunities to improve your reflexive mental framework and relationship with self and others. Dr. Conti's approach to building mental health and overcoming challenges with mental health are very different than most of the information that you'll find on the internet and elsewhere. He has decades of clinical experience, and he draws on that and data to explain the specific questions that we all need to ask ourselves when we're facing things like lowered motivation, mood, or challenges overcoming bad habits. Today, we discuss all of that, as well as how to balance action and introspection. And this is very important because I think a lot of people think about mental health as merely an introspective process. But as Dr. Conti points out, it's really a balance of thinking and doing, and often involves more doing than thinking. So during today's episode, you'll get a specific framework of questions to ask yourself repeatedly, that is every day or every week, and specific action steps to take so that you can truly become the best version of yourself and derive the greatest sense of meaning along the way. I'd like to point out that Dr. Conti also has a new book coming out, which is aptly entitled, What's Going Right? A Powerful New Method for Optimizing Your Mental Health. And I've read the book from front to back, and I have to tell you, it's a wonderful resource that includes both information and simple worksheet-like prompts that can help anyone through sticking points, as well as to build on what the title suggests, what's already going right. So if you're currently suffering, or if you're doing well and you want to level up your mental health further, today's conversation is definitely for you. Before we begin, I'd like to emphasize that this podcast is separate from my teaching and research roles at Stanford. It is, however, part of my desire and effort to bring zero cost to consumer information about science and science-related tools to the general public. In keeping with that theme, today's episode does include sponsors. And now for my discussion with Dr. Paul Conti. Dr. Paul Conti, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Congratulations on your book, What's Going Right? A Powerful New Method for Optimizing Your Mental Health. It's an amazing book. And you also hold the record, not incidentally, I think for the most viewed and downloaded episodes of this podcast ever. So,
wow.
You got a lot of Huberman podcast listener fans out there. So,
wow.
They'll be reading if they're smart,
Well,
and they want to be better. They want to feel enriched in all the ways. So let's talk about individuals first, and then I also want to talk today about interactions between people, which we probably haven't talked quite as much about, at least not here. The self, right? We all have a name, a self-concept. We wake up thinking and knowing essentially who we are, what bothers us, what we're excited about. And the question I've been living with for a long time is, how malleable is our self-view, right? And our relationship to ourselves? And we can define those, right? If we're not super comfortable or completely happy with our relationship to ourselves, how much flexibility is there on that whole picture?
I think it's very malleable. I think there's a lot of flexibility, but we have to be willing to look at ourselves. Very often we're not looking at ourselves. We're afraid of what we're going to find, or we don't know how to understand or how to bring change. So we don't look at ourselves, and then we can see ourselves as inflexible and think that we're just stuck in the same place over time. But if we're willing to look at ourselves and we bring this compassionate curiosity to ourselves of, hey, what can I learn about myself, and what might I be interested in changing in myself or in emphasizing in myself? I think we can bring a lot of change.
And the title of your book, What's Going Right, is that a good lens to start looking through when we look at ourselves? Like what works? 10 fingers, 10 toes. In my case, is that a good place to start? That I feel some sense of agency over a number of areas of my life. Is that the way to start wading into the questions about self?
I think to start off with what's going right, it's not just a way of looking at it because it feels better, but it's consistent with truth. I mean, there's far more going right in any of us, in all of us, than there is going wrong if we're here, right? And if we're listening to educational material, we want to better ourselves. there's so much more that's going right in us. And it's a good place for us to start because it helps us to be able to look at what's not going the way we want it to be, where we want to bring change in our lives. But we should start from a position of strength. And the mental health system really tells us to look at ourselves in the opposite way, to look at ourselves through what is going wrong and to put labels on ourselves that often just make us feel worse or make us feel more helpless or hopeless in understanding. But if we start with what's going right and we bring curiosity to ourselves, then there are processes we can follow to understand and to bring real change.
What are some of those processes that people could use to explore? And if you would, what are some questions that people can, or thoughts or landscapes to explore where people can ping themselves with specific questions?
So good places to start are looking at your self-talk. What are you saying to yourself in quiet moments when no one else is listening or when there's a pause in the action in your life? What are you saying to yourself? What messages are you giving yourself? And oftentimes we're telling ourselves things about ourselves that are often negative or often critical, and we're not aware that we're saying these things over and over to ourselves. So that's just one strategy. And another strategy can be to think about the life narrative that we're telling ourselves. So if you just tell yourself about yourself, or if you're telling someone else about you, what is it that you say? What is it that you say in a reflexive way? And does it match what's real and true about your life? All people have these two foundational pillars. And in the first part of the series that we did in 2023, we really sort of hashed this out. And it was the first time I really put together, hey, there's a structure of self, and we all share this. And I'd been thinking along these lines, but our talk helped me to pull together, hey, there's something that applies to all of us. Just because we're human and we have a human brain and a human mind, there is a structure of self and a function of self. And these foundational pillars are where we can look to understand ourselves better and to bring better health. So if we are aware of where to look and how to look, and we're willing to look because we're not afraid of what we're going to find, and we have a belief that we can bring change, and this is how we bring flexibility and malleability, and we can approach ourselves feeling really good that, hey, if I do this, I am going to be able to make things better. There's so much hopefulness to that, and it's reasonably grounded hopefulness.
I have a question that might seem like a leap somewhere else, but I promise it ties back to what we're talking about. In your experience with psychiatry and the brain and patients and interacting with people in your own life, do you think that there's tremendous variation or little variation in how state-dependent people are? Some people, it seems, they're so affiliative that when they're in relating to somebody else, they think and feel completely differently than they do when they're on their own. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily even extroverted for that to be true. But that when they're suddenly alone, that the internal state is very different, almost like it's two different lives. Mm-hmm. Right? There's a reason why I'm asking this, but I'm wondering about the role of state dependence and how we think and how we feel and how we think about the things around us and think about ourselves.
For most of us, life is moving very fast and life has a lot of stressors in it. And what ends up happening is we're kind of rushing just to keep up with ourselves. And when that happens, we become very state dependent, as opposed to being able to observe ourselves. So to be able to see, okay, I'm here and this is what I'm doing and this is the people I'm with and how I'm feeling and how I'm behaving. To be able to observe ourselves is how we knit together one self across situations. So we can be aware I'm different in one situation than another, right? So some of the behavior then and the sense of self is state dependent, but there's a whole self that's riding above all of it. It's observing us and knitting us together. What sometimes gets called an observing ego. And this is how we can both be state dependent, but also have a self that is true across all of those states.
I'd like to take a quick break and acknowledge our sponsor, Helix Sleep. Helix Sleep makes mattresses and pillows that are customized to your unique sleep needs. Now, I've spoken many times before on this and on other podcasts about the fact that getting a great night's sleep is the foundation of mental health, physical health, and performance. When we aren't getting great sleep on a consistent basis, everything suffers. And when we are sleeping well and enough, our mental health, physical health, and performance in all endeavors improve markedly. Now, the mattress you sleep on makes a huge difference in the quality of sleep that you get each night. How soft it is or how firm it is all play into your comfort and need to be tailored to your unique sleep needs. If you go to the Helix website, you can take a brief 2-minute quiz and it will ask you questions such as, do you sleep on your back, your side, or your stomach? Maybe you know, maybe you don't. Do you tend to run hot or cold during the night? Things of that sort. You answer those questions, and Helix will match you to the ideal mattress for you. For me, that turned out to be the Dusk, D-U-S-K mattress. I've been sleeping on a Dusk mattress for more than 4 years now, and it's been far and away the best sleep that I've ever had. If you'd like to try Helix, you can go to helixsleep.com/Huberman, take that 2-minute sleep quiz, and Helix will match you to a mattress that's customized for you. Right now, Helix is giving up to 27% off their entire site. Helix has also teamed up with TrueMed, which allows you to use your HSA, FSA dollars to shop Helix's award-winning mattresses. Again, that's helixsleep.com/Huberman to get up to 27% off. Today's episode is also brought to us by BetterHelp. BetterHelp offers professional therapy with a licensed therapist carried out entirely online. I've been doing therapy for a long time, and I can tell you that it's a lot like physical workouts. There are times when I want to do it, and there are times when I don't want to do it. But whenever I finish a therapy session, I come away feeling better, and I have specific actionable items that hadn't occurred to me that when I implement, improve various aspects of my life. The data tell us that there are just so many benefits that come through effective therapy. And effective therapy involves having a good rapport with your therapist, getting insights from them and with them, and coming away with specific actionable tools that you can apply outside of therapy. With BetterHelp, they make it very easy to find an expert therapist who can help provide those benefits that come through effective therapy. They have a short questionnaire to help match you to a therapist. And while BetterHelp has an industry-leading match rate, if you aren't happy with your match, you can switch to a different therapist at any time. If you would like to try BetterHelp, go to betterhelp.com/Huberman to get 10% off your first month. Again, that's betterhelp.com/Huberman. When somebody sits down to think about their strengths or to think about their self-talk or to just think about what they're made of and how they want to change or not change certain things, build on certain strengths, when and how should they do it?
Yeah, I think all we need to bring is curiosity, right? That's all. And curiosity doesn't have to be overly serious or worried, right? It doesn't have to have a gravity to it. I mean, it can, but it can also be very lighthearted. You know, there's so many things that we're curious about, so many things we want to learn about. And this is great. It's great for our brains and it's great for our health to be curious and to want to learn. But so often what we leave out of that equation is being curious about ourselves, right? And that can be a sort of high-spirited thing to do of, you know, what is there in me that runs through all the things that I do? How is it that I feel so different doing one thing than another? What are the common threads of me that run throughout my life? You know, this is a great way to approach what's going right in us, right? To be curious about ourselves. And it's from there that it's easier to see, wow, in one certain kind of situation, I'm really not doing as well, right? Or I'm not as happy. Like, then we can think about that and we don't have to be afraid of it. So bringing curiosity to ourselves, what runs through everything we do, and also how we're different in different situations can help lead us to all sorts of answers about what makes us happy and what doesn't. When are we presenting a true and honest self? When are we presenting a false self that even we know is false? So I think the only crucial ingredient is curiosity. And then we can approach with seriousness and gravity, or we can approach with lightheartedness. We can be alone, or we can be thinking with someone else. There's all sorts of good places that curiosity can take us.
It's interesting that you talked about true self versus false self. I think the more state dependence we have, the more confusing that becomes, right? And I think perhaps even more so in this day and age, there seems to be not a complete, but at least to me, a kind of partial erosion of etiquette. I'm not saying this to encourage people to be more rigid. It just seems to me that I'm 50 now. When I was growing up, it seemed like people would dress and act one way in one context and dress and act one way in a different context. And there's some overlap, obviously. But now there's this sort of propensity for not just oversharing, but there's information from all corners of the world coming through our devices all the time. And people are putting out information about many facets of their life all the time. Even people I went to high school with who aren't public facing in the traditional sense are putting out pictures of their kids and what they ate and this and the wins and the losses. And it's a very odd thing to do when, in fact, we evolved for so long just kind of experiencing ourselves separate from all the other activities that we were doing and certainly that other people are doing. In your clinical practice, are you seeing more challenges with people creating separation between kind of aspects of self and aspects of life because of all the information coming at them and maybe even that they're putting in the world?
I think it can be different depending upon what the person is doing, how they're using that information. So if you think of falseness of self, you know, it's possible a person can be engaged in something that even they themselves know isn't real, right? So wanting everyone to see what's best in my life and to think that, I'm doing really well, and maybe I'm doing that to hide something. Or why am I doing that, right? If I want to appear externally differently than how I am, there's a good place for curiosity about the falseness of that. What am I trying to protect against? Why is it that I want people to see me in a certain way that might be different from how my life actually is? If it has, not just all wins in it, right? But stressors too that might not be as glamorous. So that's one way we can use those resources. Another way can be to engage in ways that are more true to self. So someone who has an interest or a passion that it's hard to find people, right around them, but they can find that more distantly, or people who have a lot of sensibility and compassion for some of the difficult things in the world, who can find kindred spirits through social media. So I think we can use or misuse anything around us to either be, we can use it to be closer to ourselves and to have a stronger sense of self, right? Or we can use it to distract from who we really are and to maybe find solace somewhere else or find accolades somewhere outside of us because we're protecting against something. So I think the important point is always to be honest with ourselves. And if we bring compassionate curiosity, then we're not mad at ourselves, and that we're not coming at ourselves of, well, what's wrong with me, or why can't I do this thing better or that thing better, or why don't people like me more, whatever it may be, right? There are ways that we can guide ourselves away from honesty and truth. And if we look at ourselves, we don't have to be afraid of what we find. Maybe if we're worried people aren't liking us, we're spending time with not a healthy group of people, right? Or maybe there's something in myself I need to change if I'm feeling that. So the key is just bringing honesty and curiosity and not being so afraid or so negative towards ourselves that we're going to hide from what it is that we can find to knit us together.
Yeah, I'm not trying to demonize social media, but we are in a strange new version of humanity where, let's say somebody's sitting by themselves, chances are their experience is vastly different than it would have been 30 years ago, because they are most likely getting a lot of information about what other people are doing. Could be good information, could be interesting, but nonetheless, it's very, very different alone state. And or they are doing things that hopefully they enjoy, but there's this additional layer where it's put out into the world. This is very unusual. So the reason I'm asking about this in the context of addressing the self, exploring the self, is that I wonder to what extent being really happy with oneself at some level involves being able to be curious and explore different ways of being and ways of thinking without the impulse of sharing that and without the feedback comparison of what other people are doing. Because the moment we see something else, there's more sensory input, or the moment that we think what we're doing it needs to be shared, it changes the experience. It's not truly an alone experience.
Right.
And I don't think it matters if you put it out to one follower or to a billion followers. It's still externalizing this thing that for thousands of years was just us with our thoughts, us with our emotions.
Yes.
And so processing time alone has become, I believe, a very, very different thing altogether.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there's a sweet spot of connectedness to others. Right? And we know that it's not good to have too little, right? That isolation isn't good for us. But where the modern world has gone is it offers us too much the opposite, right? Where there's not enough aloneness, where if we're over-connected, then in order to decide what it is we even like or prefer, how we feel about things, we're looking for external cues, right? So that sweet spot of having some external check-ins. How does the world around me feel? How do people I like and trust feel? How do people who seem like me feel? How do people who seem different from me feel? It's good to have those tests outside, but to have enough aloneness that I am still thinking about myself and the questions, right, of life, the questions of my own life, I'm thinking about on my own before I'm pinging outside of me for information or validation or even guidance.
I'm willing to bet that many people will find just the being alone introspective process to be pretty anxiety provoking. In fact, there's been a little bit of a semi-comedic exchange online recently because actually our mutual friend David Senra, and David Senra has a podcast with this very podcast production company. He sat down with Mark Andreessen of, founded Netscape, A16Z Investments, and Mark made the statement that was very provocative, which was, great men of history didn't sit around thinking about their thoughts, and of course, knowing Mark, and he's a friend of mine. I think that was a bit tongue in cheek. I think he was pointing toward, I don't want to speak for him, but I think he was pointing toward the idea that too much thinking and not enough doing can be self-destructive. Of course, the media ran with it, and in classic Andreessenian fashion, he just doubled down and tripled down on that message, which was fun for a while, actually, because it got people thinking about the role of introspection versus the role of doing. And I have to say, I think what he contributed with those statements, however provocative, were useful in thinking like, how much thinking, how much doing when exploring the self. We don't want to spiral into a tunnel that we can't get out of, but we also want to make sure that we're putting things out into the world. So when you have a patient that is not depressed, is maybe struggling, right? So no clinical issue that needs dealing with first. How much do you encourage them to explore the self through doing versus thinking about their thinking?
It depends very much on who is that person, right? And where do they need to face to sort of break new ground of self? And you mentioned that most people would find the idea of just being with themselves to be anxiety provoking. And I think that that's unfortunate. I think that comes from a lack of leadership in the mental health field, and then the stigma of mental health and our fears, those black box fears that we don't understand. So we're afraid of what we don't understand. What we don't understand is ourselves. So then the idea of being with ourselves becomes very anxiety provoking. And I think that's not good. I think there are ways that we can go about being with ourselves that we don't have to be afraid of, and say, if I do that, it's interesting what I'm going to find, right? And the reflection and the thoughts and the ideas, the learning that comes from it is going to guide me towards the best balance for me, right? So there are some people who are very assertive, right? And they want to have high levels of doing in the world, but they still need some reflection, right? There are other people who are going to be very reflective and they're going to be doing less. So we need to understand what profile works for one person. It's not one exact place, but we kind of have a profile of reflection and of doing. And if we are well balanced, where we're asserting ourselves in the world at levels that work for us, and we're finding pleasure and gratification in ways that are healthy, now we're finding balance. If there's too much doing and not enough reflection, not a lot of good will come from that, right? We'll find that there's diminishing returns. We feel unsatisfied, right? Because we're doing too much and we're maybe taking less pleasure in what we're doing. But if we're doing too little, then we can feel idle and there can be a sense of learned helplessness. So it's finding what is the optimal range for a person to be asserting themselves in the world and then finding gratification in what they're doing. And if that's going well, we'll see it. There's a happy, balanced person. And if not, we'll be able to figure it out of what is going on in that person. Is there an issue somewhere, say in the unconscious mind, right? Are they asserting more and too much and reflecting too little, right? So by looking at the person and going through these steps, we can figure out what serves that person best and how might they adjust from where they are now to get there.
Is it true that there are just some people who just don't really think about their thinking very much? They just like do stuff. I mean, I've had friends say that. Like, I don't want to speak for me. I'll speak for them. They'll say that they don't think about their thinking. They just get up in the morning and they brush their teeth and they use the bathroom and they go about their day, and they're not very introspective. They're not called to think about their thinking. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, these are people who are extremely busy. So maybe that's one reason. But in some cases, there are people who just, for whatever reason, the mirror doesn't pop up in their cortex. Mm-hmm. They're busy doing and observing, and they seem functional. Are they missing out on something fundamental, or is that maybe even the goal? I ask this from a very selfish perspective because growing up, I thought, how cool would that be to just like go through life, just do stuff, not mm-hmm. think about stuff mm-hmm. from the past too much, not reflect too much, just like get stuff done. And I'm a get it done kind of person, but I think like most people, I also am forced to think about my thinking from time to time.
Mm-hmm. When you say forced, what then forces you?
Oh, sorry, it just spontaneously happens. Mm-hmm. I reflect, and the reflections usually, I'll try and generalize these because this is not about me. The reflections generally come from like, is that something I should explore? Like, is that a problem? Is the way I'm thinking about or doing that a problem? Or is the way that they're thinking about and doing something mm-hmm. a problem? Mm-hmm. This us-them thing is kind of what it boils down to. And it's either positive or negative. I confess I don't really sit around a lot and think about all the things going right. I should. I have a gratitude practice. Mm-hmm. I certainly don't sit around and think like, oh, like the walls are up mm-hmm. and the ceiling's intact and mm-hmm. I'm fed and I'm healthy. And of course, until something bad happens, and then we do our inventory, right?
Right.
But yeah, I just kind of wonder whether or not there's a spectrum of reflexive self-exploration.
People have different reflective capacity and people have different reflective interest. So there are people who have more, and that could serve them well to be more self-aware, but also people may have less reflective capacity, but be more naturally generative. And then they're just moving forward. So the question is, even though we have different natural levels of reflective inclination, right? Are we happy? Are our lives going well? If life is going well and that person is, they're healthy, they have good mental health and secure relationships, and life is going well, and they're not reflecting very much, like that sounds good. How I would characterize that is they're living through the generative drive, right? They're being productive, contributory people in the world. They're making the world better. They're learning, they're growing, so they're making themselves better, and they're just moving forward. That's a great way to be. For most of us, in order to get there, we do have to be reflective. And some of what will happen is it will come to us. You said you're not kind of planning maybe to sit down and be reflective, but then it comes to you, hey, I should think of this possibility at hand, and what are other people thinking, and how's that impacting what I'm thinking? So you become reflective because your brain is leading you there, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's saying, hey, we do need to stop and think about things. That's how we're going to make better decisions. So our brains will lead us to reflection. But if we're moving so fast or we're defended against it, right, then we're not reflective, and that's not good for us. And that's how you could see, for example, someone who's always busy, so they don't have time to reflect. But the big question is that person happy, right? If that person is not happy and they're complaining and they feel like they're working and never getting anything out of it or never getting any reward, then it's not good that they're not reflective, right? They're blocking themselves from something that they need. There are spectrums that apply differently to different people, and we all reside on different parts of the spectrum, whether it's reflective capacity or it's assertion or it's pleasure. But in terms of what we're doing and whether it's healthy for us, it's different for we're each and all unique. So we have to stop and look at ourselves like, hey, how's this going for me, right? How am I functioning? And is it working for me, right? Am I pausing and thinking enough? Maybe the answer is yes. Maybe the answer is no. Maybe I'm not sure. But if I'm not happy, let me go back and revisit that question. So this curiosity of self can lead us to, oh, how am I built to function? Am I functioning in a way that really works for me? If not, why not? What change might I bring? And here again, we're using the ability to understand and to go through a process to make our lives better.
I realize these aren't clinical terms, but someone recently said about themselves that they are an external processor. They need to talk things through in order to understand what's going on for them and make decisions. And that implies that some people are internal processors. Is that true? Do you see that in your practice, that some people do best by thinking, sitting and thinking, walking and thinking, driving and thinking, kind of working things through, and other people actually work it out by talking either to you or to their friends or family, some trusted person? Is that really, are those two probably not completely separate, but at least semi-separate bins of people?
I don't know that they're separate bins of people. I think that the ability to think and to be objective in our thinking differs among people. What happens often is we get stuck in our own minds. So then we're thinking, but we're not thinking productively, right? Because we get stuck in our own loops. And when we take the thought process outside of us, so if we write the words down, or if we say the words, and we say the words to another person, then we're bringing different brain processes online, different error checking processes online. So some of us can do more of this inside and say, hey, I've been thinking about this for a while and nothing's different or nothing's going better. Like, is there a different way? Is there a way I could think about it that's new or that's different, right? Sometimes we can do that, but a lot of times we just get stuck inside of ourselves and we have to bring different brain processes online, like making words and putting those words out there in writing or in speech is different. It sort of holds the brain more accountable. That's why sometimes we'll just say something out loud, or we'll say something to someone else and say, oh, I figured that out, or thanks for helping me figure it out. And you might realize all you did was listen, right? Because just by being there, the other person is forming words. We do more due diligence inside of ourselves that way.
I must confess, I'm fascinated by this notion of people differing in their tendency to work things out internally and then bring that forward into the world, maybe for more help or some additional solutions, or maybe just they've figured it out. So they're bringing a version of self into the world that is vetted by them.
Yes.
I notice I tend to respect that picture, but I realize that's not necessarily the way it always works. I had a conversation with my sister this morning, and I love my sister. We're quite close, and there was no friction, but the direction she was taking what we were talking about and the direction I was taking it, they weren't aligned. And so we kind of did a little bit of our brother-sister pushback. And then at some point, we both realized that we weren't aligned with the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of arrived at this overlap in the Venn diagram. And that's when it was like, okay, there was some real clarity that came to something important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I thought, like,